Hello, my name is Wade Frazier. This is January 13th, 2026, 12:26 p.m. This post is going to be a summary of written posts that I've been making over the last few weeks relating to the idea of politics and the biggest issues that humanity faces. And in this series of posts, I make the case that what I call retail politics, which is also called electoral politics, which is um, politicians, elected politicians, unelected politicians, the people in the public eye who supposedly run things. They really don't, but they seem to. And my this series of posts is about the limits of politics, why it's limited, why it's all limited, and why it really can't solve our big problems. That's the theme that's going to be in this post. The Substack post that I'm reading from as I make this video is about that. And I began this series of posts reflecting my odyssey in the pursuit of changing the energy industry. And I'll make this again brief, so I hope this video doesn't last too long. But again, a brief overview is what's in this post, and which I think I need to spend a little time on, although I've made plenty of videos about this in the past. In the end, my journey began, and these posts began with my odyssey in the energy industry. And there's no substitute for experience. And my former partner, Dennis Lee, back in Seattle, Washington, my home where I was born, where I live today, he made the biggest run ever made to bring alternative energy to the American marketplace back in 1984, 1985. And he put the world's best heating system on people's homes for free, which is the most benevolent and brilliant business strategy I ever saw or heard of. And Dennis had quite a journey to get to that point in his life. He survived leaving home at age 13, combat in Vietnam, murder attempts by multiple organized crime, having his companies repeatedly stolen by his business associates, and other mayhem. What happened in Seattle was made possible because of two things, really. One was the biggest municipal bond default in American history to that time, which was about building a bunch of nuclear reactors that all but one of them got mothballed. And also, Jimmy Carter had an energy tax credit, which Dennis's heating system qualified for. And Dennis was able to do this brilliant piece of financial engineering to put the world's best heating system on people's homes for free. And then they only paid for the remaining balance from proven energy savings. Yeah, so yeah, most brilliant, benevolent thing I ever saw in the business world. Dennis, in fact, that municipal bond defaults what got his attention, and then he also saw these full-page ads by the electric companies that begged for conservation. And Dennis thought that they would love the conservation he would bring, which would save between 70 and 85% of somebody's heating costs. What Dennis didn't realize was that those ads are all propaganda, and that was far more conservation than the electric companies had in mind. So instead of welcoming him, they engaged in organized suppression to wipe the company out. And many players were involved. This was a full court press by the power structure in Washington State, Seattle's banks, the state's attorney general, federal bankruptcy courts, the media, other government agencies. They were all involved in taking out the company. And also the electric companies, the Bonneville Power Administration, which was the ringleader of the electric companies, they infiltrated a corporate hitman into Dennis's company to help take it down from the inside while it was being taken down from the outside. And that man was responsible for the death of one of Dennis's employees, which is what radicalized Dennis in his energy pursuit. So my journey and how I how I became involved in all this was my first professional mentor invented, which was a federal study during the oil crisis years in the 1974, concluded that it was the best engine in the world for powering an automobile. And this began my dreams of changing the energy industry. And what I could do about it at age 15, I had no idea. But it was a dream I held for a long time. And actually, a couple of paranormal experiences changed my studies from science to business in college. And then another one, these are best for prayers that were answered by a voice in my head. The second one led me straight into Dennis's company as it was getting its final death blows from the power structure in Washington State in early 1986. My mentors, all of his inventions were stolen or suppressed, which I came to realize that's the world of inventing. Yeah, almost no inventors ever really profit from their inventions. They all get stolen or suppressed. And my mentors' inventions were world-shaking inventions that Pentagon suppressed. I mean, these were stolen, suppressed. This was how it works. Dennis. So literally, before I met him, he went from a net worth of zero to $50 million in like 8 months. And a year later, back down to zero as his company was wiped out and stolen. And he was basically run out of the state. And that was my fourth attempt since my college days to live in Seattle, it wasn't easy back then. There wasn't Microsoft and Amazon. It was Weyerhaeuser and Boeing back then. But Dennis couldn't get rid of me. So I actually chased him out to Boston to help him rebuild his effort. And as soon as I got there, Dennis started thinking in terms of free energy, which is energy that's doesn't cost anything. Anyway, and I won't get into that much in this post, but basically abundant, harmlessly produced energy. That's what we were pursuing. Dennis and I, we were really ignorant about a lot of things back then. We didn't know there was a free energy field. Neither one of us had even heard of Nikola Tesla at the time. A generation later, however, I realized, again, events would come, trade notes with people, etc. And I realized that in Seattle, Dennis had attracted the attention of the global elite. And a few months after I became Dennis's partner in Boston, they contacted us repeatedly. Again, their emissaries would. You never meet Mr. Big, but we got an offer for $10 million to buy out the free energy idea that Dennis came up with. Again, and it was a decade later that I understood that was the friendly buyout offer. So yeah, this is and it usually works. So $10 million was the going rate back then for friendly buyout offers. And what happened was, when I became Dennis's partner, my mentor became my biggest shareholder, and I brought him out to assess what we were doing, to see if Dennis had something that was legitimate or not. And what happened was, my mentor eventually came forward with his own idea to use his engine to marry with Dennis's heating system to produce free energy. It wasn't the only way to do it, but in fact, that way I think it's still debatable whether it could, but I saw a lot of scientists who thought it could. One way to find out is to try it out, right? So, and what happened was, and I didn't know this, I didn't know until I read one of Dennis's books years later, was that he and my mentor entered into some kind of deal where we moved the whole business from Boston to my hometown of Ventura, California, where I was raised, so he could be close to my mentor. And my mentor would provide the inventions that Dennis would take to market. If we'd been unmolested, we would eventually deliver free energy. And it wasn't any one particular technology because there have been quite a few, but it was Dennis's ability to bring pigs to market. That was, and then he was surrounded by people who weren't cutthroats, which was a first for Dennis. So, yeah, we became a five-alarm fire threat that the global elites had to take care of. So soon after, just a few months after, my mentor came on board, and we were skyrocketing with a marketing plan that was about building, installing, and selling that heating system. And we got raided by sheriff's deputies in Ventura County. Again, just all this happened just a few miles from where I was raised. And during the raid, they stole our technical material from our head researcher's office. He was never the same after that. And yeah, that began my life. That raid began my life's first year. And several months later, when I was going into a stress collapse, Dennis met with a CIA guy in Chicago who represented European interests. They offered Dennis $1 billion to fold the operation. And Dennis, being Dennis, he actually his counteroffer was they keep the money, but they use that money to bring free energy to the world. They didn't like that deal. They didn't like that deal. So literally just a few weeks after Dennis turned down that offer, he was arrested with $1 million bail, and that's when my nightmare really began. And so yeah, that was my life's first year. And in Seattle and Ventura, our companies were ultimately stolen by Mormon swindlers in the midst of attacks by the local power structures. And a generation later, I learned that the Mormon financial empire is the ringleader of the global elite, who sit at the apex of the world's power structure, far above world governments, retail elites. You know, Bill Gates and Elon Musk, these kind of people, they're way down the hierarchy. They're nowhere near the top. Neither are the Rockefellers or the Rothschilds, and we had interactions with them also. Yeah, these people are not the global elite at the top. So, and in fact, other than a few organizations, nobody knows who these people are, because they know that being invisible is good for business. And essentially, they control the world economy. The energy racket is the big one, but there's several others that are also under global elite control. They interlock at the top. The others are military, intelligence, media, banking, medicine, organized religion. I think I gave them, but anyway, and they all interlock at the top. And this is the global power structure, which I didn't learn for a long. It took me a long time to learn these things. I was just bearing the brunt of their machinations for years. And then years later, I gradually understood what we had really lived through, what we really encountered. Now, far more than met the eye happened in Seattle, Boston, and Ventura. Yeah, the global elites, we gave them some interesting days at the office and probably some sleepless nights. And Dennis is still trying. I saw him last year in September, and he's still trying to make a dent, which is incredible to witness and a privilege to witness. Yeah. One of a kind. Dennis is one of a kind. Should be dead dozens of times over. My moment of truth that was on the witness stand in late 1988 when Dennis's preliminary hearing. And the day that changed my life really was my day on the witness stand, and the prosecution was trying to intimidate me as I testified with antics that wouldn't last 5 minutes, 10 seconds in a fifth grade classroom, but in kangaroo court, it was all acceptable to try to intimidate the witnesses while they're on the witness stand. Yeah, kangaroo court, stall in a show trial. This was kind of what it was like. And I saw right after that day. And in fact, it inspired me soon thereafter to sacrifice my life, mortgage my life, to try to give Dennis some chance of getting to live to see this side of the bars again. And it worked in the biggest miracle that I ever saw, which Dennis and I and others around us realized that it was a case of divine intervention. Dennis should not have survived the experience in Minturn. And they still almost murdered him. They all still almost got Dennis killed. And he got lucky. He only had some fingers broken and teeth knocked out. But once I sprung Dennis from Dale, then my heroics were over. Then I was trying to rebuild my shattered life because it was ruined in those days. And I also began my days of study. And during my days with Dennis, we heard we were a mecca for alternative energy and other, let's say, challenges to the economic system. And we came to understand that what we went through was not unusual. This happens all the time. Being murdered is also a common outcome. Anything that the global elite see as a threat to their interests, they wipe it out. But they have quite a deep bag of tricks, which is subtle, varied, sophisticated, and they have deep pockets. So they paid out hundreds of billions of dollars in buyouts to buy out these disruptive technologies that could, and mostly energy technologies, that would threaten their global rackets. But they're so good at what they do is that most people subjected to organized suppression never even realized that they were. Now, what I also realized was that organized suppression is mostly what I'll call structural. Most of the people involved are really not in on it. They're just doing their jobs with perverse incentives. Like prosecutors don't care if their targets are innocent or not, and they'll happily lie and deceive to get their coveted convictions to keep their kill ratios high. They admitted this to us, so it's like, yeah. So this was a very sobering time of my life. I never saw the world the same again after these days. So most people who've been suppressed by the guys at the top don't even realize they were suppressed. In fact, the friendly buyout offer usually works, but if they start getting to where they're doing other things, it's so subtle that most people don't understand. I said I didn't realize what had happened for many years. It took many years afterward before I started trading notes with other people, the situations where I finally went, aha, that's what was happening. So yeah. It's like if I had known what I was really getting into, I don't know. But such is life. That was a harsh way to begin discovering how the world really works. And actually, when what inspired me, I got a piece of advice. So back when Dennis was in solitary confinement, we're trying to throw a Christmas party for his inmates. And promotions, all the dirty, corrupt officials and stuff all got promotions and probably under the table money for taking us out. And I understand, and this is also normal. I met with a former policeman, who had actually been railroaded out of his career by these same gangster officials, judges who control the drug trade, and judges that people murdered, etc. And this policeman was named Gary Wayne, and he gave me the advice that was critical. It led to my act of trying to spring Dennis, and Gary's advice was, nobody's going to help. He said, well, what's happening to us happens all over the United States all the time. And I was wondering what Senator's Dorsey I could camp out at. And Gary said, nah, nobody's going to help. They're all in the same club. And this happens all the time. And I learned how right Gary was, and I accepted it though. And that's when I decided. Gary said, "Take them on their own court is the only chance you got," which is essentially what I did. Gary again has my eternal gratitude for that. And again, I met Gary after reading his book that Dennis's wife gave me when I asked her how I could help get Dennis out of jail. And in a chapter of Gary's book is his involvement in the aftermath of the John F. Kennedy assassination. And again, I'll briefly cover it here. And Gary got involved because he was really good friends with Audie Murphy, who is America's most decorated war hero. And 3 weeks after the assassination, Gary with Audie and the sheriff of Dallas County, Bill Decker, they met with Senator John Tower, and Tower was the senator. He replaced Lyndon Johnson when Johnson became vice president, vacated his seat, and Tower took that seat. And 3 weeks after the assassination, they met with Tower, and Tower said that JFK was killed in a backfired CIA operation that was intended to frame Fidel Castro for a fake assassination attempt to justify an invasion of Cuba. And Gary's book was published in 1987. And again, Gary, because we had shared trauma, shared experiences, I knew what it took to do what Gary had done. He kept trying to take these people on their own courtrooms, etc. I knew Gary was not making up this story. But what I did was I spent many years studying the JFK assassination, and I never saw a convincing piece of evidence contradict it. In fact, as more evidence came out, it further reinforced Gary's story. In fact, the story that Gary related from John Tower today is the leading scenario for the JFK assassination, swirling around Cuba, the CIA, Oswald, and E. Howard Hunt. It's the John Tower conversation minus this backfire part that was interposed by unknown people, which Gary actually names some of them in his work. And lo and behold, a decade after Gary publishes his book, Operation Northwoods was declassified. In fact, it got declassified because the movie JFK came out in 1991, and it inspired Bill Clinton to start declassifying more JFK-related documents, and Northwoods was one of the ones that was declassified. And the Northwoods document was authored by the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and its proposal was to come up with fake terror incidents in the United States and frame Castro for it to justify an invasion of Cuba. And in fact, the chapter in Gary's book on Operation Northwoods, there are literally passages that are verbatim. And Gary actually lived long enough to see Northwoods declassified. He wrote about that, how the exact conversation that that Tower had with him, you can see parts of it in Operation Northwoods. In my opinion, it's the most compelling evidence that there is that Oswald didn't do it, which means conspiracy. Which also leads to the idea that the City American president was a puppet. Yeah, if the City American president can be murdered in broad daylight in front of hundreds of witnesses by a CIA operation, all gets covered up, how much power could an American president have? And that was the chief lesson that I took away from that. And Gary thinks that Israel was involved, Jewish mobsters, and Jewish mobsters were involved because Jack Ruby was a Jewish mobster who actually Gary encountered in the 1940s. He even had a conversation with him. So yeah. So anyway, and while I was doing this series, I actually made some more posts about this. I've been writing about the JFK assassination for 25 years now, and I made a few posts, sort of recapitulating a lot of this, making it very clear about how Gary's testimony is the big one. It's still ignored and marginalized in mainstream discourse, but that's the one to be reckoned with, in my opinion. So I think that JFK's murder was actually Dwight Eisenhower's warning about the military-industrial complex when he left office. I think it's his warning. It come to fruition. Yeah, so I think with JFK's murder, the military-industrial complex and their corporate American buddies took over American politics. And since JFK's murder, all American presidents have been puppets. So, and yeah, how to say it, probably not a big revelation to people who know how the world works. So have or a good idea of how it works. But after springing Dennis from jail, in fact, Dennis still got railroaded into prison, almost died there. That's another story for another time, but he survived, barely. But when I soon left my hometown, got married, left my hometown, moved to Ohio in 1990, and began my days of study, which have yet to end. And one of the first things I did was I subscribed to a magazine which Ed Herman was the editor of, and Noam Chomsky was one of the contributors to. And I was studying many subjects at once, and the media was one of my chief studies. In fact, I had watched Dennis get smeared in the media from the time I met him. And so I was ready for the message of Ed and Noam. In fact, Ed and Noam wrote books together, the most famous of which was called Manufacturing Consent, which is still the propaganda model, which basically is Ed's creation, is still the one to be reckoned with. It's still the most explanatory framework for understanding how the media operates, the capitalist media in the West. In fact, Noam actually said that the propaganda model is more or less a special case of the constraints that all intellectuals are subjected to in capitalist societies. In fact, Noam took it all the way back to the Old Testament and the prophets, etc. So, servile intellectuals who serve power. It's a very old dynamic. And those who speak up have hell to pay. This is nothing new. And so the United States with a so-called freedom of speech is something different, but not that different really in practice. So it's it's how to say it. Speech is not that free in the world or the United States. It's free in the world, the United States, but not as free as it could be. And as Ed said, it doesn't mean you're heard. So so the big media racket just chugs along. Ed, in his propaganda model that Ed came up with was the structural model, which basically said the structure of the ownership and the advertisers and the news sources and attacking divergent perspectives and the overriding ideological framework of anti-communism during the Cold War, because the book was published in 1988. All of those influences ensure that the media is going to reliably serve elite interests. So it's gonna say what the elites want them to, even though the journalists in the field, most of them think they're actually reporting the truth when they're not at all. And this is something that, again, this is beyond the scope of this post, but this is something I studied for many years, and it's well worth understanding why the media serves up what it does. Ed never denied that elites could intervene conspiratorial in the media, but he argued that the structural constraints of the media assured its performance that would serve elite interests. And most journalists never figure it out. They're seldom the wiser. And this is common. I found this is common in all rackets. All rackets this way. Probably 70% of the people in these rackets are blissfully unaware that they're in a racket. And about a quarter of them, though, something's not right. And maybe a percent or a few percent get it that are in a racket. And those people, they're not drinking themselves to death, they're getting out, or they're finding ways that they can somehow throw some sand in the gears of the system. And they get weeded out. So the truth is something that is not, you won't find it in the media much. In the mainstream media, the truth is not something that it trucks in. It's mostly brainwashing for the masses. That's what it primarily is. And it turned out that Ed, again, his structural analysis of a propaganda model came from his studies of corporations. Ed was an economist who was a professor at Wharton, and actually his propaganda model arose from his studies of corporations. And anyway, so that's where it came from. And it turns out that the left in general prefers structural analysis for understanding how the world works. Noam Chomsky is a big proponent of this, so it's structural analysis in where just to structure these systems ensure their outcomes, and the people within them just doing their jobs is what creates most of the outcome. And I said most people are oblivious to that, and most people, it's very few people wake up in a lifetime. This is something I eventually learned. We get brainwashed while young, and it lasts for life. This is how our world works. All societies do this, but the American version is particularly insidious and sophisticated. So, but my life was ruined by a genuine global conspiracy. And so, the organized oppression that we suffered from was definitely orchestrated from the very tops of the world's power structure. And it was quite an experience to live through that. And when I started trading notes with others, and it's not that big a community of people like me. Yeah, the stories are all the same. It's like, okay, and it's again, you risk your life when you play these games. It wasn't until I actually wrote this post that I realized that my dividing the human journey into epics is really a structural framework, very similar to what Ed came up with. I really hadn't thought of it that way, but I look at it, it's like, okay, it is. It's a structural framework. So I divided the human journey into epics, and each was based on its energy practices. Going back to the first stone tools, the control of fire, the big animals that fueled the conquest of Earth, the domestication of plants and animals, and then the exploitation of fossil fuels, which is still fueling our industrial age. Yeah, still more than 80% of the world energy consumption is fossil fuels. In this century, that will largely end one way or another, which is partly what my work's about. And how to say it, from the day that I became Dennis's partner, I knew that we were onto something big. I had these dreams of change. I had these dreams of changing the energy industry from when I was 15. And so I knew it was big. I had a very good idea of the transformative potential of free energy. But it's only after many years of study that I really began to understand the epical significance of it. It would be a brand new epic, like a super epic. In fact, when I was studying for the essay I wrote back in 2014, it's we become what's called a type 1 civilization on the Kardashev scale. And so this is something that, again, is the biggest event in the human journey. It would be the biggest event in the human journey if that technology was available to the public. And in fact, during all this, and we're going back 30 years ago now, over 30 years, one of my friends, close colleagues in this business field was kidnapped and taken to an underground facility, and he was shown free energy, anti-gravity, and a whole host of exotic technologies, which looked like a magic show. Back when they got done with the show, my friend said, guys don't play in my galaxy. In fact, they also said during their show is that, a lot of what you're going to see is people think that's ETs. They attribute it to extraterrestrials. Well, that's our stuff. So anyway, that aligns with a lot of what Steven Greer has had to say over the years. So again, a lot of overlaps. So yeah, overlaps with my friends, my colleagues, my fellow travelers, and Steven Greer is one of them. And so he's had his missteps, but a lot of what he says, I lived through. So I've been able to validate a lot of what Greer asserts. Yeah, so what would happen is the arrival of free energy would end scarcity. For all practical purposes, scarcity would end. And scarcity is at the root of all violence. And yeah, and scarcity is not fun. Okay, and all of nature is scarcity has been the journey of life on Earth has been one of scarcity. Some periods of relative abundance, which I've called golden ages. Some life forms will have it. Usually after mass extinctions, when humanity would tap each new energy source, there would be a brief-lived golden age before they exhausted the energy source and then bred up to the carrying capacity of the land. And so there are these brief golden ages. And in fact, over the human journey, the energy surplus has continued to increase with each new energy source being tapped, which led to human societies becoming more humane and less violent. Yeah, so our societies are far, like I live across the street from Microsoft, and I live in one of the most affluent places in the world. And violence among the members of our society, this community, that's unknown. Violence is unknown. The things that were humanity's constant companions are unknown where I live, and so it's a thing where I've lived in it. I realize how transformative abundance can be, and how scarcity is the root of all violence. Yeah, in fact, an Israeli scholar, said it as succinctly as I've seen, which is that the biological compulsion to survive and reproduce in a world of scarcity is at the root of all violence. Or was it? A second here. Yeah, so and scarcity, and uh, in fact, I write about this a lot. I won't speak about it too much in this post, but there are horizons of the human potential that haven't even been glimpsed yet. If you eliminate scarcity and fear from human societies, it will usher in an epic of abundance and love. Simultaneously, it will also heal the ecosphere because we will no longer be exploiting Earth's ecosystems to get our food, to live well, to get our energy. We don't need to do that any longer. And so, I have all sorts of writings on this, which I don't need to get into with this one today, because this series of posts is about making it happen. And why what I call retail politics isn't going to help much, if at all. Yeah, I've seen this over and over again. Very strong doubts that it's going to help. Politicians aren't heroes. Uh, Yeah, so as the energy surplus has increased over the epochs and human society became more humane and less violent, the arrival of free energy is really a continuation of that trend, except with a much higher trajectory into one where everybody in the world will be richer than Bill Gates is today. Just like the average American today is richer than Louis XIV, who was Europe's richest man 3 centuries ago. Yeah, so yeah, and it's a world that few people can even imagine. And I understand. Again, it took me a long time to realize why people don't not only do not understand what a world of abundance and love looks like, it scares them and they deny it. All these kinds of things. And I realized that that's normal. Yeah, it's a normal reaction. The people of every epoch could not imagine the one that was coming, and it turns out that they also can't imagine the one that they came to before them. Yeah, so they can only really understand the epoch they live in. The ones coming and the ones that are prior, they have very little understanding of them because life was so dramatically different. So it makes sense why people don't understand. I'm working with people who do, and those are people who have to be awakened. I call them disillusioned idealists. The Boys and Girl Scouts who actually tried to make a dent and realized the game was rigged, which woke them up. Those are the people I need for my effort. And they're not easy to find. But it turns out that not only are we on the brink of this epic of abundance and love, we also stand on the brink of global catastrophe. And the greatest immediate ones, in fact, in Noam Chomsky's last book, probably his last book, which I summarized, and I'll be doing a summary video of that soon. And Noam's summary of Noam's work in general. Noam devoted a chapter to this. The two biggest threats right now of global catastrophe as a result is global warming and nuclear war. I don't think I need to explain nuclear war to anybody, but global warming, which is I've been seeing it. I see it every day. In fact, today I'm having a 60-degree day here in Seattle, which is very unusual for this time of year. In fact, I might set a record for the day. We'll see. I've watched the glaciers melt the last 35 years here and stuff. Yeah, it's just global warming is a real deal. But the biggest risk of global warming is that the agricultural systems will not be able to adapt in time and they'll have epic crop failures. And billions of people will starve, largely in poor nations. So, and that itself may lead to nuclear war. But maybe we'll have nuclear war over the lost oil. So yeah, the energy issue, there's no escaping it. It's the dominant one. Everything else comes in a distant second place. And the USA's proxy war in Ukraine, that's the closest humanity's come to a nuclear war since the Cuban Missile Crisis in '62. So, yeah, imperial, in fact, Noam's chapter was about how the United States is leading this parade to oblivion. And how can we stop it? Well, we're not going to stop it with retail politics, in my opinion. It has an effort that's free of all that and stops trying to bang on those kind of doors is, I don't think anything else is going to work other than just making it and giving it away. But it can't be done by a few people because it's got too many enemies. It needs more allies. And, the USA Today is supporting the genocide in Gaza. among his many imperial crimes. And, I mean, as I was doing this series, right? Trump invaded Venezuela, and in fact, it's refreshing that Trump's all about how much oil we're going to get, and now it's Greenland he wants to take over. In fact, when he got elected, I wrote a post on this. In fact, I'll discuss Trump's presidency soon. Uh, he's trying to build a global North American technocracy, Western Hemisphere technocracy, dominated by the United States. And so that's what it's been on his agenda for a long time. And so that's what he's trying to do is that. And actually, it may avoid nuclear war. In fact, Trump wants to eliminate nuclear weapons. We'll see if he gets it. We'll see. We'll see if that happens or not. But until you eliminate scarcity, and again, burning all that oil is going to turn Earth into a hothouse Earth, which is going to have severe ramifications. So the sooner we get on to free energy, the sooner we will forestall global catastrophe. And again, back to what I said earlier, I realized that almost everybody reacts to the idea of free energy with denial and fear. And in fact, the most obtuse are the so-called intelligent. Yeah, so the scientifically trained and stuff. These people, they deny free energy's possibility with the laws of physics objection, and they dismiss the organized suppression as a conspiracy theory. So they just dismiss it all. Yeah, really nutty. But this is, I realize this is they're blinded by their ideological commitments to structuralism, materialism, and scientism. Yeah, it's really blinded them to key aspects of how our world really works. So the political left, yeah, they don't get it. Political right doesn't get it either. But in ways, the political right is, both of them have grips on pieces of the elephant. None of them see the whole elephant because their perspectives are too limited. And so this is, in fact, Brian O'Leary, my astronaut colleague, he basically said only spiritualists can really see the big picture and integrate it all. And my jury's been out for a long time on whether people have to have a mystical orientation to really get the big picture, to become a comprehensivist, as I call it. I didn't think they needed to have a paranormal experience as a mystical awakening. Brian thought they needed to. And I suspect Brian was right. I suspect. I've never seen a materialist get it. I've never seen a structuralist really understand the big picture. They just understand pieces of it. So this is part of the challenge, understanding how it works. So anyway, scientism is the worship of science, or at least what they call science as the only path to truth. And paradoxically, the left is largely scientifically illiterate. And in fact, it's exemplified by the embracement of postmodernist thought. Which that's where identity politics comes from. The whole trans craze comes from this, and postmodernism rejects science altogether. It says there is no objective truth. It's like truth is whatever you think it is. This kind of, and that's what, no mammal can change its sex. This is like a scientific fact. But postmodernism rejects all that. And it's like, oh, a man can announce he's a woman and society's obliged to treat him as one. And in fact, feminists understand that the whole trans craze is a patriarchal assault on women and children. Yeah, so children are being sterilized and mutilated before the age of consent. And women are getting their spaces invaded by men who call themselves women. Yeah, so the rad feminists, that they call them TERFs, and some of them proudly wear that label. They realize that this is an attack on women. And that the left has embraced it is, so the feminist says, the right is abandoning abortion, and the left is promoting this whole trans craze, and women get it on the short end for both ends. So this is this is part of the problem. Hey, rad feminists, maybe they can be an ally. Hasn't happened so far, but we'll see. But and the right, they reject global warming. Same scientific literate, but again, both of those camps, their ideologies override reality. It's like they believe in things that are obviously not true. All societies do this, but it's been interesting and frustrating to see how every political camp has its nonsensical beliefs that they adhere to, which there's so much evidence that they're not accurate beliefs. But giving up people's beliefs is, yeah, I said, very few people ever do it. They get brainwashed in a certain belief system, and they're set for life. And the only way you can break out is to awaken. Usually you only awaken through experience. Yeah, reading my work, watching my videos, you can't awaken that way. You can only awaken through experience, where you come to see, and then you can live how what you were taught is lies. And once you see one of them, it's much easier to see the rest of them. And it's lies everywhere. There's truth out there. It's like hunting for little grains of sand, and buckets full of lies. The global elites control the world economy. All big industries and professions are rackets to one degree or another. And the more wealth and power invested in any of them, the more they are racket-like and under the control of global elites in the end, ultimately. And most people, again, few people in any of those rackets understand it. They don't even understand their rackets, much less they're being controlled by these global elites who are invisible in the current world. And they all interlock at the top. But the energy racket's a big one, because energy is the whole ball game. It always has been. The whole universe is nothing but energy. So the energy industry, energy racket, is the dominant one. They're of the hundreds of billions of dollars they spent in buying out stuff. The vast majority has been disruptive energy technologies. That's my understanding. So in this series of posts, I actually covered the most dramatic American events of the past century and their likely conspiratorial nature, which was attack on Pearl Harbor, John Kennedy assassination, 9/11 terror attacks, and the COVID pandemic. And all of those, the left consistently denies any conspiratorial intent behind those events, but it's pretty obvious. In fact, that for Pearl Harbor, the Hilo newspaper, literally the week before the Pearl Harbor attack, the Hilo newspaper's headline was "Japanese will attack that weekend." Yeah. It wasn't too big of a surprise to people who run the United States. Jack Kennedy's murder, again, back to what I learned, is that it was definitely not a lone nut murder. 9/11, same thing. And my post gets into that, but there was more than met the eye to 9/11. What all that is, I'm not sure. But Osama bin Laden was actually protected by Bill Clinton back in 98, 99, when Milosevic, the leader of Serbia by then, tried to get bin Laden taken out of the field there in Kosovo, because he was leading the jihadists in slaughtering civilians and stuff under American direction. So yeah, far more than met the eye happened with 9/11. And COVID, oh my, from its development in a warfare, likely came out of a biological warfare lab, to the suppressing all the alternatives, to draconian lockdowns, etc. It was like a textbook in tyranny. And so, yeah, far more than that's still all coming out and playing out. So, in fact, a lot of people actually, if there's a silver lining, a lot of people, like in the United States, woke up. They realized that there's something wrong with this picture. And so, this is, and I've got friends who were killed by the vaccine, killed by the vaccines. And yeah, this is a catastrophe that coincidentally lined the pockets of the elites. The biggest transfer of wealth in world history was from the American middle class to the elites, over $4 trillion during the pandemic. What a coincidence. So, and all these events, I call them 1% conspiracy and 99% complicity. In fact, I learned this during my ride with Dennis. And as I kept studying this and looking at conspiracies and structural analysis, et cetera, I kept seeing the same pattern over and over. So really, the conspiratorial aspects of these is pretty small, really, just a little bit. Yeah, one provocateur and 100 average people, provocateur prevails. I saw this repeatedly. And so, and the left usually denies a 1% conspiracy, and the right denies a 99% complicity, because both camps are thinking like victims instead of creators, and creators pray with love. And so, yes, fear is really what keeps people seized on these ideologies that are not really valid, because they were taught these ideologies as a way to survive, to get in-group status, etc. So you believe this way, you get fed. It's been very effective. And so very few people ever escape it, and even the so-called smart, and so yeah, it's not intelligence, it's where your heart is that matters, not so much what's in your head. So also in this series of posts, I wrote on the global elite and the lessons of history. And I also I did a very brief version of the journey of life on Earth and the human journey, and energy's role in them, and to help make clear the transformative potential if humanity had abundant and harmlessly produced energy that was used safely, peacefully. So anti-gravity, again, was part of what my friend was shown. So yeah, just give me anti-gravity and free energy. All the other magical stuff my friend saw, they can have that. Just give me free energy and anti-gravity, and I'll give you the fifth epic, which is the epic of abundance and love. And again, back to the point of these posts, again, is back to the limits of politics. So, Brian O'Leary, my colleague, he was a former astronaut, Ivy League professor, advised several presidential candidates, and a free energy visionary. And near his life's end, Brian informed me that electoral politics was a dead end. And Brian would have known. And this is something, and I wasn't like, I didn't know it already, but, Brian was like, yeah, that doesn't work. Yeah, well, Brian had several encounters with several multi-year experiences with D. In fact, Brian called it his codependence with Washington, D.C., where he would go there full of fire and eagerness, ready to make a dent, and to slowly be disillusioned and eventually flee. and a few years after looking at his wounds for a few years, he'd come back for more. Did it like 5 times. This whole go there, try to make a dent, flee. And so, anyways, Brian gave it his best shot. So yeah, he definitely, yeah. So these people like Brian, this isn't some theory we came up with one day. It's what we learned through bitter experience. While making this series, I also made a post, which I linked to in the Substack summary, on conventional alternative energy, which Brian always thought was too little and too late. And I reviewed them, and I would say that his concerns are still relevant. Yeah, it's still debatable. Elon Musk today, he's making all these. It's interesting that he's doing this. Like, in fact, some of my buddies think he's doing this on behalf of the global elite, and they're trying to do an end run on me, which is he's preaching abundance and all these wonderful, basically he's talking about the fifth epic, less free energy, less anti-gravity. And so he's talking about, chemical rockets to do all this and solar panels and stuff. Maybe it could do it kind of, sort of, with AI and AI robotics, etc. But free energy would. And again, there'll be no doubt with the free energy anti-gravity tech I'm aware of. Musk is advocating it within the framework of, again, chemical rockets and solar panels. Again, to me, it's really not the fifth epic. It's more a continuation of the fourth, maybe reaching its promise. But yeah, and so that could work. It could maybe, sort of, except I know that this other stuff is real, and so all this humongous human effort to do this is like, it's a waste compared to what I know already exists. So, Bucky Fuller, who, and I really briefly, when I finished my website in 2002, pretty much as it exists today, one of Bucky Fuller's pupils contacted me, and Fuller basically said that all politics is really about allocating scarce resources. That's what it's all about. And so and he called it the design revolution, as I recall, but he basically, in fact, Fuller became aware of free energy just before he died, and he realized, and he knew that there would be hell to pay by anybody who's trying to make free energy happen. But Fuller said that all politics was about slicing up the loaf of scarcity, about allocating scarce resources, and that politics will become largely obsolete in a world of abundance. It won't make sense. It won't make sense any longer. Yeah, so politicians. I don't think anybody's going to miss that too much, but politicians will become obsolete, just like elites will become obsolete, just like slaves became obsolete when nations industrialized. So there are certain social rules that make sense in certain epochs that don't make sense in the next. And elites will make no sense in the fifth epoch in a world of abundance. And they understand this, which is why they're behind suppressing free energy, anti-gravity, etc., because they know it's the end of their reign on Earth. They will no longer be able to have Earth as their plaything, humanity as their plaything. So part of me is sympathetic to their plight, but we're dancing with making Earth uninhabitable, causing amazing misery and agony among the world's people so they can keep playing their power games. I'm trying to end that, but I think we have to do it lovingly. And I don't think the politicians are going to help, because they are puppets who dance to the strings of those elites. All of them, to one degree or another, do that. The president, very much so, and everybody. So there isn't a politician on earth who I've seen that is saying the truth. Any of the truths that I've learned, you won't find any politician on earth discussing it. I've never seen it. Yeah, so city American presidents, all politicians, billionaire philanthropists like Musk and Gates, etc. None of them are close to the top of the world's power structure. And so there are no retail political solutions to our existential problems. I mean, this is what I eventually learned this. And it's why I do what I do, because I'm not trying to go through the political system, I'm trying to commandeer the political system or enlist the political system. The best I can do is leave us alone. And if there's enough of us, we sing the song, they will. Yes, as Dennis said when I saw him in September, if I can get 5,000 people to learn to sing the song of abundance, it's over. They will not be able to stop that. But right now, I'm a choir of one. Yeah, with some friends hiding in the deep background, but on the global stage, right now it's just me. But I'm looking for people who can learn to sing the song of abundance. That's what it's about. And so I've given up. I gave up on retail politics a long time ago. I got invited to the White House 20 years ago. I got invited to the White House and was not interested in having tea with Bush and Cheney. Anyway, so that is really what I have to say about the limits of politics and how it's really not going to help very much, if at all, with our transition to the fifth epoch. And I have seen so many people waste their time, risk their lives actually pursuing the political solutions to these problems. Yeah, I mean, I banged on the Department of Energy's door with Dennis and Brian. And in fact, I don't want to go too far afield here, but there's these so-called white hats and black hats among the global elite and among the world's world governments, etc. And this is true. So there are people who are, again, I said there's a few who woke up, they're good guys, etc., but they're greatly outnumbered. They do what they can. In fact, the people who kidnapped my friend were supposedly white hats. And when Dennis and I spoke at these hearings on solving the nuclear waste problem, because we had technologies that could do that, the guy who ran the hearings, he pursued us and met with us and actually said that nuclear waste treatment and handling, he said it's a racket. And he said, unless our solution made these guys a lot of money, it wasn't going to go anywhere. This is a Department of Energy official trying to wise us up, to what what we were advocating wouldn't have a chance unless some billionaires made more billions off of it, which is kind of dumb, right? But yeah, so I could go on and on about our encounters with the retail political system, et cetera, and how it's all a dead end. Yeah, there's no NGO. There's no environmentalists actually treat free energy like the enemy. Yeah, so there's all these avenues that newcomers think are like, here's the answer. Like, nope, none of those are the answer. And retail politics was the first one people should cross off their list as an avenue to making this happen. Yeah, not going to happen, in my opinion. So anyway, so that's the limits of politics, particularly to address our biggest issues. And so that's all I have to say for now. And thanks for watching.